when you implement Salesforce CPQ, implement the full sales cycle, new business, amendments, and renewals. I've been pulled in to a few implementations done by other partners or even done by clients who've chosen to implement themselves, and they didn't implement the creation of the contracts or the amendments or the renewals. And now all they can do is new business. And when their sales reps needed to do an amendment or needed to do a renewal, they were creating new business transactions. And at that point, you're just creating a lot of noise in your system that isn't really working for you. So the first thing I always recommend is don't try to break out the implementation of CPQ in phases by features, right? Don't just do new business first and figure you'll come back to amendments and renewals later. Amendments and renewals can be implemented in a fairly straightforward way to get you started. There's obviously a lot of things to think about when you, as time goes on, that you can use to enhance that. How are renewals priced is one of the things. But making sure that you're thinking about your amendments and renewals is important. Now, to the question that was submitted, the question had to do with getting your historical data into the system, because when you implement CPQ, unless you're starting your business on the same day that you implement CPQ, you've probably got some historical sales data. You may or may not have it in Salesforce. So if you have those customers that can come back and do an amendment or come back and do a renewal, it's important to have that data in your system. Okay, so on day one, ideally, you would want at least some of that data in your system. And for clients who have a lot of it, I'm dealing with folks that have anywhere from 50 existing active contracts to 50,000, and it's anywhere in the spectrum in between. So it really depends on what we're talking about. When I speak about this, I'm speaking about specifically active contracts, because those are the things that you can either amend or renew, right? And we need to make sure that the data is in the system in a way that Salesforce CPQ can consume it. So there is a process for doing it via data load. Part of our scoping conversations when we are talking to you about your project, I sometimes kick this can down the road a little bit if you have a fairly complex model, or if you have fairly complex or convoluted data, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when we build out your system, the important thing is to figure out what it's going to take to get existing data in to be able to be consumed by CPQ. We need to know the state of your existing data, the volume of your existing data, and what are we going to build? Because we need to know if we need to do, what kind of transformation needs to be done to get that data into the system in a way that CPQ understands it. To the question earlier when we were talking about bundles, I've had instances where in the past, those were sold as a single line item, and maybe you figured it out in Excel or on a calculator and sold it as a price, but you didn't have it broken out as a fixed fee and a % of total line. But that's how it's going to be going forward. So you have a few options, right? You can have the data accessible to you, even if it's not in Salesforce, and just decide that come renewal time, we're going to put it into Salesforce the way we want it. Or you can load it into Salesforce as those separate line items and figure out what is the price for the fixed fee and what is the price for that % of total line, and then load those in as assets and subscriptions in a way that can be consumed by CPQ. But it's really important that you have that data available. It does not all have to be in there on day one. I've told clients this, that when somebody comes forward and they say they have a few dozen or even a few hundred active contracts, sometimes it makes sense if you have complicated bundles in your system that are a significant transformation from the way you used to look at your data. Sometimes that's real hard to load. And if you have a limited number of contracts that you have to create, we'll sometimes make a recommendation that let's just transact them in Salesforce, create an opportunity in a quote, get it in the way you like it. We call it a legacy opportunity so it doesn't flag in any of your reports, and contract that to create those records that are perfectly structured for CPQ to consume. So we might do something like that. The other piece of this, as I mentioned, is the state of your data. So getting in and understanding what your data looks like. And then the last thing, when we talk about, how do we get data into your system, is what is the level of transformation? A lot of organizations use a CPQ implementation to as a transformational moment, right? We used to sell it this way. We've always wanted to sell it this other way, but we haven't been able to do that without a tool like CPQ. This is our moment. And you take that moment and you repackage it and you create your bundles and you adjust, you change the pricing to what you've always wanted to be, which is completely different from the way you've been selling it for some number of years. And it's very difficult to take unstructured data or data. It's very difficult to take unstructured data and try to move it in. It's just as, it's challenging to take data that is structured, but needs to be completely transformed and put into this system. So we would have to spend some time to look at those elements, right? What would we build for you? Are we going to use bundles? Are we going to use nested bundles, right? And what is the state and volume of your data today so that we can figure out what transformation is necessary and therefore what approach to take, okay? And I don't know if the person who asked that question was on the call. I don't think she was at the time. I do see some folks have joined, and I think Kayla, I see Kayla on there. Kayla, you had a question, and I think we touched on it a little bit, but welcome, first of all. And you had asked about justifying the cost to get budget approval. So you're thinking about CPQ, and you're trying to come up with ways to justify the expense to your management team. Is that, you want to speak to that at all? David, can you unmute Kayla? There you go.
Yes. Yeah, so we just added on a bunch of licenses. We've got some, really big initiatives coming up. And so obviously CPQ, not that the price isn't justified, it's just a heavy bill. So when it comes across the CFO's desks, they want to know, why should we implement this? And why can't we just continue to do things the way that we already are? So some of maybe the main talking points, the differentiators of this is kind of why we need it. This is what we'll be able to do.
Okay. CFOs are usually the ones that love CPQ. So usually that's not where the pushback comes from. They love the idea that the transactions are going to be clean, the sales are going to be clean, they're going to be, all the revenue is going to be in the right buckets. So they're usually the ones that love it. Especially, we spoke a little bit earlier about ASC 606 compliance, and they're the ones that are on the hook for that. So generally, the CFOs, whenever I'm in a room full of people, and it's been a while now, but whenever I'm in a room full of people and we're showing the data that's available to you, the transactional data that's available to you, and how structured it is, and the visibility that you get, and what comprises a deal, and the MRR and ARR buckets, and what was your expansion, and what was your, what did you have for expansion, contraction, renewal churn, churn on amendments, all this data that's available to you. It's usually the CFO that's nodding his head the most. They love it. So I think one of the things, we did touch on this a little bit earlier about sort of the benefits of CPQ, but we may decide to do, if you want, a call, if you want, with even some of your stakeholders to talk through some of the challenges that you're having. For example, if you care to share, David, I think you need to unmute her again. If you care to share, maybe what are some of the things that you're thinking about that are leading you down the path where you're suggesting CPQ to your organization? What are some of maybe the pain points you're experiencing?
Yeah, so we have some disparate systems right now. All of our billing and our financing goes through NetSuite engine. And not only that, we had an equity firm buy a couple of different companies last summer. And so now we're kind of in the process of merging these companies. Mm-hmm. So there's a portion of each sales team that's coming under one umbrella, which is going to be the North American sales team that was currently disparate between all of these different companies. And so now we need a single source of data and a single platform for all the sales rep to be able to sell everything that we offer under one bundling, okay, and a neat way to be able to track it.
Okay. So you're consolidating all the offerings and everybody's going to be selling a smaller core of products, or people are going to be selling all these other products that came as part of the acquisition?
There's going to be, it's not even that it's smaller or bigger, it's just that it's bundled in a different way now. So all of our offerings are the same. It's just you can get front office, you can get back office, or you can get payroll. We work at a HCM company,
Okay.
so we offer guard tracking, HCM, payroll, time and labor management. So we have some bundled pricing. So each of the salespeople within North America will be able to sell those specific bundles. But now they're all going to be certified to be able to sell all of our offerings, as opposed to only selling each company's previous offerings.
So they are not necessarily as familiar with some of those other offerings, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And are the bundles configurable where you have some options, some components that you can choose to add or choose not to add, or some that are required or recommended, or are they all prepackaged, hard solutions?
They're fixed. Yeah, they're prepackaged.
Okay.
This is what we're getting.
Okay. So, so